She tossed my gift onto the table and laughed like I'd handed her a box of garbage. Right there, in front of 120 wedding guests, my sister held up the wooden keepsake Dad made and said, "Seriously? A moldy jewelry box." But she didn't know what was hidden inside, and she definitely didn't expect me to stand up and read a second will, Dad's handwritten one, that named me the sole heir. "Hi, I'm Jenna." And that moment, it changed everything. Her new husband froze, the priest went silent, and the bride fled the ballroom in tears. Before we jump into the story, if you don't mind, let me know where you're from by leaving a comment below. That way, I can send a special hello your way. Now go ahead, grab yourself a warm cup of water and find a comfy spot. It's time to begin the story. I hadn't even made it past the second table when I heard her laugh. Elaine stood at the center of the ballroom, still radiant in her ivory lace gown, holding up my gift like it was a rotten banana someone had left under a seat. Her voice carried through the room, high and amused. "Is this supposed to be antique?" she said, twisting the small wooden box between her manicured fingers. "Or did someone clean out their attic?" A few polite chuckles followed, mostly from her circle of friends in identical champagne-colored dresses. I watched from a distance, rooted by the sting of 100 eyes that weren't even trying to be discreet. The box wasn't impressive, I knew that. Dad had carved it by hand when I was in high school. Nothing fancy, just a simple pine keepsake box with initials burned into the underside. It had sat on his desk for as long as I could remember, holding paper clips, spare change, and sometimes his wedding ring when he took it off to paint. I found it again after he passed, tucked in a drawer with a note taped underneath. "Let her mock if she must. You'll know when to open this." Elaine tilted it toward the crowd again. "Seriously, Jenna, a moldy jewelry box. This your big wedding statement?" I wanted to vanish. My navy dress suddenly felt too plain, like I'd shown up to a gala in a raincoat. I clutched my purse a little tighter and looked away as she set the box down with exaggerated care, right on the edge of the dessert table next to a silver tray of mini lemon tarts. Dad once told me, the things worth keeping don't usually look like much at first. Back then, I thought he was talking about love. Now, I wondered if he meant self-respect. I kept walking, skimming the edge of the ballroom like someone scanning for a lost coat. The room glowed with autumn gold, candles in tall glass cylinders, velvet napkins folded like origami, shrimp and grits in miniature cups passed from tray to tray. Everyone here looked like they belonged. I hadn't realized until that moment just how much I didn't. Mom spotted me and gave a small wave from a table up front. She didn't rise. Her eyes flicked from me to Elaine and back again. Then she looked down at her wine glass like it had just said something rude. I gave her a nod and kept moving until I found an empty table near the back, right beside the wall of windows overlooking the river. The low thrum of music hummed under my skin. I pulled out the chair, sank into it, and tried to disappear. The clink of glasses, the rise and fall of laughter, it all blurred into a dull roar in my head. I stared out past the string lights to the black stretch of water beyond. It was only 5 in the evening, but the sky had already begun its slow dimming, the kind that made everything golden for 10 brief minutes before falling gray. I sipped my water. I thought of Dad. How he would have hated this wedding. The fuss, the expense, the way Elaine had insisted on imported lilies flown in from somewhere I couldn't pronounce. He would have pulled me aside and made a quiet joke, just for me. Something about how weddings were like appetizers, pretty, expensive, and gone too fast. Elaine's voice rang out again. I turned just in time to see her lift the box one more time, then toss it lightly like it was a game. It landed with a dull thud on the end of a table. The lid bounced open. Something slipped out. My stomach dropped. From where I sat, I recognized the soft yellow edge of a manila envelope. Familiar handwriting across the front. One phrase printed in Dad's sharp, deliberate scrawl, to be read only if needed. I was on my feet before I could think. By the time I reached the table, most of the guests had turned their attention back to the servers walking by with crab cakes and champagne. No one noticed me. Not even Elaine, who was now preoccupied with her bouquet and a small crowd gathered for photos. I reached for the box. The lid hung open, slightly cracked. The envelope lay beneath the velvet lining, undisturbed, save for the corner sticking out like it had been waiting for air. I slipped it into my purse without lifting the flap. My fingers lingered on the edge, feeling the familiar texture of the paper. It was heavier than it looked. I pressed the lid closed, carefully, and straightened up. No one saw me, no one asked. I zipped my purse shut, walked back toward my seat, and whispered to myself, just loud enough for the river beyond the windows to hear, "Not tonight, but soon." Dad hated the cold, so I kept the house warm, even when the gas bill made me wince. He used to joke, "I'd rather melt than shiver with regret," as he layered on 2 blankets and still complained about drafts no one else could feel. By the time winter settled over Charleston in late 2022, I was lighting the fireplace by 3 in the afternoon and simmering soup just to keep steam in the air. The house he built, 2 stories of redwood, creaky floors, and a slanted roof that always held snow just a little longer than the neighbors, had become my world. I moved back in when his diagnosis came, and within weeks it felt like I had never left. My mornings began with ginger tea, my afternoons with doctor calls, and my evenings with the soft hum of his oxygen machine in the background. And always, Milo at my feet, curled in a warm loaf shape, like he, too, was guarding something fragile. My job at the library understood. I was technically still employed, but I hadn't been behind the checkout desk in months. When my supervisor called to ask if I could join the city reading fair, I hesitated for a second, then declined. "Family," I said simply, and that was that. Dad didn't like a fuss. "Don't hover," he told me the first week. "I'm not dying today." So I learned how to hover sideways, by doing dishes louder than necessary, watering the plants twice, folding laundry that wasn't dirty. On my birthday in December, he handed me a small box wrapped in newspaper. "Didn't want to go fancy," he muttered. "Used what was in the bin." I smiled and opened it slowly. Inside was a wooden box, rough, square, old. I recognized it. He'd used it years ago to store old screws and curtain hooks in the garage. "You're re-gifting me a toolbox?" He shook his head and pointed to the bottom. "Flip it." Underneath, taped carefully to the base, was a note in his handwriting. "For when you're not sure what's worth holding on to, don't open unless you truly need to." I blinked, unsure if it was another one of his strange birthday riddles or something else entirely. That night, after he'd gone to bed, I stared at the box for almost an hour before placing it in the top drawer of my dresser. I didn't touch it again for months. The days passed slow and oddly full. I cooked, soup mostly, butternut squash, chicken noodle, tomato basil from scratch. He couldn't eat much, but he said the smell made him feel like he had an appetite. We read together in the evenings. He loved to kill a mockingbird. I'd read it aloud while he dozed off, one hand loosely curled on the armrest. Sometimes, when I walked past the study, I'd catch him scribbling something at his desk. He'd always close the folder or tilt it away before I got close. "Old tax papers," he'd say. But once, I saw my name on an envelope before he tucked it into the wooden box. Elaine called twice that winter, once on Thanksgiving, the second time, just after New Year's. Her voice was distant, always framed by background noise, traffic, party chatter, once even the sound of a cork popping. "I'm slammed at work," she said. "I'll try to come down before spring." Dad didn't react much. He'd nod and change the subject. "How's Milo?" he'd ask me later, as if Elaine hadn't just been on the phone. The last week was the quietest. He slept more, talked less. The house dimmed in a way I couldn't explain, as though it too was bracing for something. On his final night, I sat beside him with the fire going low. The air smelled like cedar and the lavender lotion he used to like. He opened his eyes once, looked at me, and said in the softest voice, "Keep going, even if it gets hard to." Then he squeezed my hand and went still. I stayed beside him until morning. Not crying, just listening to the clock tick, watching the window fill with snowflakes so thin they looked like torn paper. Milo jumped onto the arm of the couch and pressed against my side without a sound. 3 days later, my phone rang. It was Mom. "Come over," she said. "Bernard's coming. It's time." The Charleston property, the stocks, the accounts, all to Elaine, Bernard said, his voice steady, crisp, professional. I sat still on the edge of Mom's leather sofa, my fingers tracing the seam in the cushion beside me. The air in the living room felt too still, too quiet for what I already knew was coming. It was March, but Charleston hadn't warmed up yet. Outside, sunlight filtered through the windows in that soft, golden way Dad used to call good thinking light. Elaine crossed one leg over the other, her beige blazer perfectly tailored. She didn't smile, not exactly, but the subtle lift in her chin was enough, a kind of silent victory pose. Next to her, Mom stared into her lap, her hands folded too tightly. Bernard continued, reading from the official pages like it was any other day. Remaining financial instruments held jointly will be transferred per state inheritance law. Then a pause. To Jenna Harper, he leaves a keepsake box containing items of sentimental value. There it was. No mention of funds, property, or even so much as a bond, just a keepsake box. Elaine turned to me. "Guess I get the land, you get nostalgia." I didn't respond. Dad once said, "Sometimes what's public is just for peace." I thought he was talking about marriage back then, but now the words circled back with a weight I hadn't expected. I reached up, adjusting the wool scarf still faintly scented with cedar, his scarf, the one he always wore in winter. Bernard cleared his throat, closed the folder, and folded his hands. "That concludes the reading. I'll leave you ladies to speak privately." "Thanks, Bernard," Mom mumbled, rising awkwardly to walk him to the door. Elaine remained where she was, fingers tapping lightly against her thigh. I stood slowly, nodded at Bernard, then excused myself. Upstairs, the guest bedroom hadn't changed. A faint line of dust traced the shelf where old photos once sat. I opened the closet and pulled out the small pine box Mom had handed me the night before, the one Dad had asked to be saved for after the will. I placed it on the bed, took a breath, and opened it. Inside, a single envelope sat on top of a few folded papers. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Jenna, read only when the time is right. I sat down, hands trembling as I peeled it open. The letter wasn't long. If you're reading this, the will's been read, and I imagine it was exactly as expected. I'm sorry for that, but I needed to give Elaine what she thought she wanted. I needed her to stop looking. But you, Jenna, I trust you to look deeper. There's a second document in this box. It's been notarized and witnessed by Joseph Linwood. He knows the details. It's not a contest, and I hope you never see it that way. But there are things I didn't want passed by name only. Things I built for someone who understood me. You always listened. Even when you didn't agree, you stayed. I wanted to leave something that matched that kind of quiet loyalty. I pressed my hand to my chest. My heart beat so hard it felt like it might shake the envelope. Beneath the letter was a thinner packet, clipped neatly, a legal document. At the top, personal addendum, Russell C. Harper, dated 6 months before he passed. It wasn't long, just enough to change everything. He had set up a private investment account. Modest at first, but through quiet saving and some real estate flips, it had grown. The total balance listed in the document, $427,000, felt like a number from someone else's life. And the beneficiary? Only one name. Mine. His signature, in black ink, witnessed by Joseph Linwood, not filed with the official estate. A private decision as deliberate as every word he had ever spoken. I folded the documents slowly, placed them back in the box, and closed the lid. Downstairs, I could hear Elaine laughing faintly, probably on the phone already, planning renovations or figuring out how to convert the dining room into a wine cellar. Mom was quiet. I imagined her standing at the kitchen sink, staring out the window, unsure of what to say or if she even wanted to try. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. Just still. Later that night, back in my own apartment, I sat at my desk with the documents laid out in front of me. Milo jumped up beside me, curling into the crook of my arm like he had the winter before, always knowing when something had shifted. I opened my email, 2j.linwood@linwoodandgray.com. Subject, confirming authenticity. Dear Mr. Linwood, I'm reaching out regarding a private document left by my father, Russell Harper. He mentioned your name in connection with its witnessing. I'd like to confirm its legal status and discuss next steps. Please let me know a convenient time to talk. Sincerely, Jenna Harper. I hit send, closed my laptop, and looked at the quiet box once more. I won't do this out of anger, I whispered into the stillness. But I will do it, because Dad wanted me to. Before you all toast to the future, I said, there's something from the past that still matters. The ballroom hushed. Forks paused mid-air. A few people turned toward the head table, where Elaine and Ethan sat beneath a canopy of glowing string lights and white roses. Beyond them, the river caught the light of the lanterns, shimmering like it knew something was about to change. My voice didn't shake, though my hands trembled slightly beneath the tablecloth. I stood near the floral archway, holding a cream-colored envelope in one hand and my breath in the other. Elaine blinked, confused at first, then narrowed her eyes. I hadn't planned to speak. I hadn't even planned to stay past dessert. But the weight of the envelope in my purse all evening, heavy in the way only truth can be, had pulled at me until it felt dishonest to remain silent. Dad once wrote, "Truth isn't about timing, it's about courage." And tonight, I had just enough of it. Sorry to interrupt, I said, my voice steady. But this letter was left by my father, Russell Harper. It's a legal document signed, witnessed, and dated 6 months before his death. Elaine stood abruptly. This is my wedding. I know, I replied, meeting her gaze. That's why it matters. A few people shifted in their seats. Corinne sat frozen, her wine glass half raised, her face unreadable. Ethan leaned forward, his brow tight. I opened the envelope and unfolded the pages carefully. He left this for me, for us, for the truth. The music had faded now. The jazz trio stood silently behind their instruments, watching like everyone else. This document, I said, names me, Jenna Harper, as the sole heir to all personal and private assets held in my father's name. This includes financial accounts not publicly declared, personal collections, and his share in the Spring Street property. Someone in the audience gasped. A woman in a blue shawl whispered, "That's over $500,000. Elaine's voice sliced through the air. "That's fake." Her hands were clenched, bouquet forgotten on the table. "It's not," I said quietly. Joseph Linwood was the witness. At that moment, from the second row of seats, Mr. Linwood stood. He was older now, with thick-rimmed glasses and a calm, firm presence. He nodded once. "That is correct. I notarized and witnessed Mr. Harper's private addendum. His wishes were clear." Elaine's face turned pale, then flushed deep pink. She looked at Ethan, expecting him to say something, maybe to laugh it off or take her side. But he didn't. Instead, he slowly untangled her hand from his arm. "What are you doing?" she whispered, voice low, sharp. He didn't answer. He just stood up and stepped slightly away. Not far, just enough. The priest, still standing at the altar with a leather-bound book in his hands, closed it slowly and looked to Elaine. He didn't speak either. Not yet. I folded the papers and held them to my chest. This wasn't about money for me. It was about acknowledgement, about the truth of who stayed, who sat beside him through chemo and sleepless nights, who read to him when he couldn't hold a book. This isn't revenge, it's clarity. Elaine stepped down from the raised platform, the lace of her gown catching under her heels. "You've always been jealous," she hissed, "always wanted what I had." I never wanted what you had, I replied, softer now. I wanted what was real. Her eyes glistened, but not with tears, more like fury left with nowhere to land. The ballroom sat in stunned silence. Even the clink of silverware had stopped. One by one, a few guests stood. A cousin I hadn't seen in years, a college friend of Ethan's, a woman from Dad's old construction company. They didn't say a word, just stepped back from their chairs and quietly exited. Elaine turned, looking at them, and then back at me. You ruined my wedding. I took a breath. Number I reminded it who we were before all the silk and sparkle. She turned and fled, dress trailing behind her, high heels echoing down the marble hallway. The doors swung shut behind her with a muted thud. I didn't chase her. I looked down at Dad's signature, bold and steady at the bottom of the document, and for the first time in a very long while, I felt seen. She left the honeymoon suite before sunrise, Mom whispered over the phone. She didn't even take her shoes. It had been a week since the wedding, since the letter, since Elaine ran from the ballroom in a blur of lace and silence. Charleston was colder now, the kind of cold that snuck in through window seams and wrapped itself around your ankles when you weren't paying attention. Outside, wind rattled the panes. Inside, I cradled a warm mug of ginger tea and tried to ignore the hollow stillness that had settled into the corners of my apartment. The echo after truth is always the loneliest sound, Mr. Kent once told me, and I understood now what he meant. I didn't regret telling the truth, but I hadn't expected the quiet that would come after. The phone didn't ring with congratulations. There were no late-night texts from cousins saying, "Good for you," just space, distance. A kind of polite social vacuum that made me wonder how many people had always seen me as an extra in Elaine's spotlight. "I think she's staying with a friend," Mom continued, her voice softer than I remembered it ever being. "In Greenville. She hasn't called me back." I didn't ask for more. Not about Elaine, not about what Mom thought of it all. For the first time in months, I wasn't interested in filling the silence with excuses. That morning, I'd gone to the clinic because I'd been dizzy for days. I blamed it on stress or the leftover adrenaline from the wedding confrontation. But when the nurse raised her brow after checking my blood pressure and gently suggested a test, I nodded without thinking. The result came back faster than I expected. "You're about 5 weeks along," the doctor said, smiling kindly, hands folded over her clipboard. I blinked. That's not possible. But it was, and somehow I knew it. I'd felt it in the way my body had shifted lately. Deeper breaths, unexpected fatigue, a quiet tug in my belly that I couldn't explain until now. The walk home was slow. I passed the park where Dad used to feed the squirrels, the corner store where I once bought him socks with tiny books on them. I thought about what he would have said. Maybe something simple. Maybe just a nod and, "Well, you're not going through it alone." I made soup that evening, creamy potato with rosemary, and poured it into a mug rather than a bowl. Milo jumped onto the window ledge and watched the leaves scatter outside. The wind made everything feel temporary, even time. Later, I sat down with a pen and a small stack of thank you notes, one for Dr. Wells, the oncologist who always called Dad Sir even when he joked, one for June, the night nurse who smuggled in honey sticks for his tea, and one for Dr. Lambert, the woman who had told me today, with such ease, that a new life was growing inside me. With each card, I slid in a small photo. Most were pictures of Dad in his last year. Soft smiles, flannel shirts, Milo on his lap. Simple, real moments. I didn't write long paragraphs, just a few lines. Enough to say thank you. Enough to say, he mattered to us. I folded the last envelope, sealed it, and placed it on the table. The sky had gone dark, the kind of deep, coastal black that pressed against the windows like velvet. I stepped out onto the small back patio, wrapped in a thick cardigan, mug in hand. The air bit at my cheeks. I pulled my scarf tighter and sat on the old wooden bench Dad had sanded down the summer before he got sick. I closed my eyes for a moment, then looked up at the sky. My hand drifted to my stomach, warm through the wool. "You're not alone," I said quietly. "Not for 1 second." A gust of wind answered me, lifting the edges of the blanket I'd tucked around my knees. Milo meowed from inside, pawing gently at the glass door, and then came the knock. Not loud, just 2 soft taps. I stood slowly, heart rising into my throat. The porch light buzzed as I reached for the handle. I opened the door, and there she was. Elaine stood in the yellow glow, her hair windswept, heels gone, feet in old tennis shoes, eyes rimmed with something I couldn't name. She didn't speak, just held out her arms. In her hands was the box, Dad's old box, the one he used to keep in his study, the one I thought was long gone. She said nothing, and I didn't close the door. "I don't want the money," Elaine said. "I just want to understand how I lost everything." Rain tapped softly against the windows. Charleston had that kind of rain in January, thin and gray like a curtain pulled slowly across the sky. I stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, rinsing teacups while the scent of lemon balm filled the room. She said it without drama, no sharp edges in her voice, just quiet confusion, like someone piecing together the end of a dream they didn't know had finished. Mom was outside arranging paper lanterns along the wooden fence, soft red ones we'd found in a box of Dad's old decorations. She'd suggested we light them this evening, just the 3 of us, as a way to mark his birthday. "He would have turned 70 today," she had said earlier, her voice hushed. I dried my hands on a towel and turned to Elaine. "You didn't lose everything," I said, "but maybe you lost track of what mattered." She looked at me, eyes tired, but without the bitterness I used to brace myself for. We sat at the table, Milo hopping into the window seat, curling into Dad's old cushion like he always did when the house grew too quiet. Elaine reached into her tote and pulled out a folded envelope. "I found this in his briefcase," she said. "Years ago. I didn't read it until last night." She slid it across the table. Dad's handwriting stared back at me, unmistakable. Elaine didn't ask for permission. She just opened it and read aloud. "If you're reading this, you've lost more than money. You've lost time, too. Time pretending you didn't need anyone. I know pride. God, I know it well. But I also know how cold it gets when there's no one left to hold your regrets with you. If you've made it this far, then maybe you're ready to remember who you were before the noise. The girl who used to dance in the hallway, who asked too many questions, who cried when Jenna left for college." Elaine's voice cracked slightly. She folded the letter closed and held it in both hands. I reached over and placed my hand on top of hers. We didn't say anything. Later, we joined Mom in the backyard where the rain had eased into a light mist. She was wearing Dad's old jacket, sleeves too long, and humming something under her breath. 3 lanterns sat on the table beside her, each one with a name written on the side in marker. One said Russell, one said Dad, and the last, written in my handwriting, said Pop. We lit the candles inside carefully, the flames flickering to life in the cold air. The river was just beyond the fence, slow and steady, its current patient. We carried the lanterns down the slope, our boots pressing into the damp ground. Elaine held hers with both hands. "I didn't know he still saw me like that," she said. "He always did," Mom answered gently. "He just stopped saying it when he thought you wouldn't listen." We released the lanterns one by one, watching them float out into the water, their red glow mirrored in the dark river. It was beautiful and quiet, the kind of quiet that follows the heavy work of forgiveness. I turned to Elaine as the last lantern drifted around the bend. "I forgive you," I said, "but it doesn't mean I forget." She nodded, no protest in her eyes, just acceptance. That night, after everyone left, I sat by my desk and pulled out the last sheet of stationery from the drawer. I wrote slowly, the words not rehearsed, just felt. "Dear Dad, your grandchild will know you. Through stories, through silence, through love. They'll know the way you laughed when the soup boiled over, the way you folded notes like secrets, the way you saw people, Not for what they gave, but for what they stayed through. Thank you for staying, even now. I folded the letter and placed it in the wooden box beside my bed. Milo curled at my feet, and outside the last of the lanterns disappeared into the night. As I watched the last lantern disappear into the river's bend, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt whole, not because everything was resolved, but because I had finally made peace with what remained. Sometimes, healing doesn't arrive with big gestures. It shows up quietly, in an old letter, a soft apology, or the hand of someone who's finally ready to stay. In life, what we keep only becomes ours when we understand why it matters. If this story stirred something in you, I'd be honored to hear your thoughts. Feel free to share your own stories about love, loss, or finding your way home again. I'll be here listening.